Welcome back to my mental health and crime channel. My name is Huda London. This is for entertainment purpose only. This is the case of the Idaho quadruple murders that took place on the 13th of November, 2022. Brian Christopher Kohlberger used the words that he is eager to be exonerated. We have a crime justice professor with a criminology background who's going to explain a bit more about the term he used. I find that to be interesting.
I just want to start off with a little bit of background information on you. What got you into the criminology field, and how many years have you been studying it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually received my bachelor's degree in journalism, and during that time, I was really interested in crime reporting. And so it was actually a conversation with a professor where he kind of nudged me that I think criminal justice is actually where your interest lies, because I was wanting to write about crime. Basically, that was all I wanted to write about. And so I made the decision to get my master's degree in criminal justice. And from there, I went on to get my PhD in criminology and criminal justice. So I started my master's degree in 2011. So I've been at it for quite a while now.
And of course, I reached out because I wanted to define some of the terms that are swirling around this kind of beginning stages of identifying a suspect, having him in court, and what that means in terms of getting him back to Idaho, since this was an out-of-state arrest. So if you could, big word right now is he's waiving his extradition hearing. Can you explain what an extradition is and what that means in terms of waiving the hearing?
Yeah, so basically, an extradition is the removal of a person from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction, generally due to criminal prosecution or punishment. So in this case, it would be removal from Pennsylvania and transport back to Idaho. So as you mentioned, his defense attorney stated that he plans to waive his extradition hearing. Basically, all that means is that he is not planning to fight his transport back to Idaho. So he essentially will accept that transport back to Idaho. Once that extradition is approved, it can technically take up to 10 days for him to be transported back. But just my opinion on it is that he will likely be transported back to Idaho as soon as possible. I would think very likely it's going to be sometime this week.
And why would a suspect or their attorney opt into this? Does this move the process faster into finding somebody guilty or not guilty? Explain why someone might choose to do this.
So right now it's being reported that he is looking forward to being exonerated or absolved from guilt. So my take on waiving that extradition hearing is that he is ready to have his day in court, to see the charges against him, because they have not actually released the information that they have leading to his arrest yet. So I really take that to mean that he's ready to see what they have on him, and he is hoping to be absolved of being absolved of guilt or blame.
Great. And then just jumping right into exoneration, since you mentioned it previously, what does that mean? And if you could expand on what it means to be eager to be exonerated.
So he stated that he looks forward to being exonerated, which generally means that he's looking forward to being absolved of. I really take that to mean that he's ready to see what they have on him, and he is hoping to be absolved of being absolved of guilt or blame.
Great. And then just jumping right into exoneration, since you mentioned it previously, what does that mean? And if you could expand on what it means to be eager to be exonerated.
So he stated that he looks forward to being exonerated, which generally means that he's looking forward to being absolved of guilt or blame. To me, it's interesting that he reportedly used that word and not the word innocent and not the word acquitted. Acquitted generally means being found not guilty. So I'm surprised that that's not the word that was used. often in criminal justice, exonerated is used to describe people who have already been convicted of a crime and then have that conviction overturned or reversed. So I do think that term, that choice of the word exonerated, is interesting. I take it to mean just that he's ready to be absolved of the guilt or blame. But in our field, it's often used specifically for people who have already been convicted. So it is a little bit confusing. And again, at this point, it's been reported that that was the word that he used.
Right. Okay, well, I'm glad to know that even like the experts are a little bit questionable of some of the language used in this, because me not having a criminology background, I was trying to like keep in line all the X terms that was being thrown out. So that helps, that this is confusing for a lot of people.
Yeah, like I said, I wasn't there in the room, and that this is just a report at this point, but my thinking is that he does understand what these terms mean, so it is a little bit surprising that he did not use the word acquitted or cleared or innocent. But without speaking to him directly, it's hard to know why exactly he picked that exact term.
So when I tell somebody else, like, he used the word exonerated, that means to be absolved of guilt or blame. Is there another way to kind of like break that down even more? Like, because I feel like people similarly would be confusing that with acquitted. And does that mean he's not guilty? I feel like, how do you define those three separate terms that you mentioned and not get them crossed over each other?
Yeah, so generally, this is why it's a little bit confusing that he used this word. So he didn't use the word innocent, reportedly, of course. There could be things lost in translation all the time, right? Reportedly, he didn't use the word innocent, which, would be that he didn't do it. That would be a claim of innocence. Being acquitted means that he was found not guilty. So, it's possible he could have said, I'm looking forward to being acquitted, which means being found not guilty. Exonerated in our field, like I mentioned, is often used to describe people who have already been convicted and have already, and now is trying to get that overturned or reversed. So when someone's exonerated, generally that means they've already been convicted and sentenced. So it is an interesting choice of words by him, reportedly, that he used the word exonerated.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I feel like that kind of answers all the questions I had in terms of just kind of what brought us together. But we kind of sort of talked about his education in criminology, being that he was going for his PhD studies at Washington State University. With your background in criminology, is there anything that you can share in terms of this suspect? Does it make sense with somebody that you thought like aligned with a potential suspect profile? I guess walk me through this major development in the case with your knowledge in the subject.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing that's interesting about this, as somebody who got my PhD in criminology and justice in 2018 and is now a professor in the field, a lot has been made of this research study that has come out from Reddit that he reportedly, and many news outlets are saying that he was part of, saying, oh, this is so creepy, this is very eerie. And I recognize why that would look eerie. But in our field, that study is actually very par for the course. So in criminology, the interest is in motivation and understanding why people commit all types of crimes, right? So that study in and of itself does not necessarily raise any red flags. I currently teach a media crime and justice class. Many of my students are very, very interested in, why people commit crime, serial killers, all sorts of things like that. I myself took a serial killers and psychopaths class in my master's degree program, and the whole class was very interested in the topic. So interest alone is not necessarily a red flag. What it does tell me about him is that he likely has a strong understanding of the criminal justice system here in the United States, and he likely has a strong understanding of what's going to be coming next. He very likely understands the media attention that is going to be brought to him and to this case. And so, as somebody who studies media and crime, I'm definitely kind of bracing myself for this next part, because this is the part of the case where generally so much focus goes to him and what motivated him and his interest in his life story. And, I'm very worried that the victims are going to be lost in this part of the story.
And that's a very fair concern. And we're doing what we can to stay in touch with the families that we've connected with throughout this entire process. And we'll definitely keep that in mind, like as you said, as this continues to develop, because as Moscow PD had mentioned, this is just the new beginning of this phase in the entire case.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's been released that he worked under a very famed criminologist in his time in Pennsylvania. And so it's very likely that he knows the level of interest that this case has, especially being that he was reportedly in Washington immediately after and, was there in class as it was being discussed reportedly. So, what his PhD studies really tell me is that he likely understands the system, and he likely understands the level of attention going to come to him in the weeks, months, and frankly years, depending on how long it's out from now on. So, yeah, like I said, his interest in criminology and justice in and of itself is not a red flag. My students are very interested in very similar things, and it wouldn't necessarily stick out to me at all, given the topics that I teach.
I think that's very fair to say. And in all of this, again, with your extensive background and degrees in the field, what questions do you still have at this point in the process, where we are with identifying a suspect, a weapon still not being found? What questions are you asking on your side of things?
So there's two things. I think, like most people, there's an interest in the connection between him and the victims and whether they knew each other, whether that was in passing or they had a relationship or they were strangers. Stranger victimizations are incredibly rare. So it'll be interesting to see what the motivation was and what the connection was. I'm also very interested in how to better support the community and the families of the victims. Again, they often get left out of the story at this point, and so I'm hoping that a lot of focus will be there as well. It'll also be interesting just to see, as he likely has a strong understanding of the system, what the next steps are going to be. Is he going to, plead not guilty? How long are the proceedings going to take? In big jurisdictions like Los Angeles County, things can take a long time, but it's possible that things will be moving faster in Idaho. So it really just kind of depends. So I think for now, I'm most interested in the connection between the suspect and the victims. And of course, he is innocent until proven guilty. So there's a lot to come forward. I think the probable cause affidavit will spell out a lot of the key information, not all of it, but a lot of the key evidence in this case. And so I think most people are very much waiting for that to be released to have a better understanding of what happened here.
And for those who are invested in this investigation locally, across the country, across the world, I'm sure you've studied many court cases in your field. I guess, is there anything to say in terms of how long we can expect this to go on? Like you said, even in LA County, this would probably take some time. And I don't know if the magnitude of the case or the magnitude of the charges would move it any faster or move it any slower. Is there anything that you can say to those who are like, I want answers now? Are we going to get answers now?
I think it's going to take a while, personally. The fact that there is so much attention on this case actually makes me think it might take longer for answers. And the reason I say that is that I would not be surprised if there is a move to potentially have this trial moved out of Latah County into a neighboring county, because there is so much attention in that county. It's not uncommon for defense attorneys to say, hey, maybe for fairness sake, we should move this to a neighboring county to get a jury that potentially is unbiased. So we'll have to see really what's going to happen at this point, but would I be surprised if this takes months or even years? Not necessarily, because of how much attention there is. With that said, I think that it appears that Latah County Prosecutor's Office is very motivated to see this case through. And so it'll just kind of depend. But I think people need to be patient and really need to focus on who are the journalists and official sources on the ground that can give me information that is validated, that is truthful, and is not leaning into some of the rumors and theories that are going on in other parts of the internet. I don't think speculating is very helpful, and it can actually harm people. And up until they released the name of this suspect, people were being named publicly on public forums that at this point the police is stating had nothing to do with it. So, from that perspective, I'm really hopeful people will stay tuned to their local journalists and kind of figure out who are the people that I should be following for the facts in this case.
Absolutely right. And I feel like your bachelor's degree in journalism kind of helps in wanting to support the local journalism, because you understand, you've been there, doing the groundwork yourself in that education space. So again, thank you very much for the support and the encouragement. It means a lot.
Absolutely. And it's hard not to get swept up into some of these theories and rumors. And I understand that, those theories and rumors get a lot of clicks and a lot of attention. But at this point, it's really important to stick to the facts just in general. And I really applaud you and all the journalists on the ground that are doing that.
Or at least one of the last questions I have is,
yeah.
Out of sheer curiosity, did this investigation come up in any of your classroom discussions in the last month and a half since the murders took place?
It's interesting. They absolutely did. I teach media crime and justice. I also teach women crime and justice. So it came up in both of those classes, and we regularly did updates in our class talking about the case. What was interesting to me is that I definitely have some students that already knew a lot about it, and then I definitely had a group of students that knew nothing about it, right? So we are in California, so a little bit further removed, but our university, our city is not a stranger to high-profile crimes. The Golden State Killer investigation happened here in Sacramento, and genetic genealogy was part of that investigation. And at this point, it's been leaked or alleged that genetic genealogy may also have been used in this case as well. So yes, I definitely talk to my students about this case by virtue of what I teach and the interests of my students. And, it's interesting because other professors at University of Idaho and Washington State very likely also talked with their students about this. And, in my own situation, I'm always very cautious that people in the room could be connected to violent crime generally, or violent crime in Sacramento or in California. And so I'm sure that those professors were also, cautious in what they said, made sure that they weren't potentially triggering or harming students in the class that may have been victimized or knew the victims, which at this point, given the small community that it was, it's possible that some did. So it's one of those things where it's almost easier to talk about cases that are not in your immediate area, because the chances of someone being directly connected is a lot less. So it'll be interesting to hear in the coming weeks whether those professors brought it up in their classes, if they did, if they kind of gave that caveat of, we need to be careful in what we say, people may know the victims. So it's one of those things, it's a tough topic to talk about, any violent crime. The sad reality is that many people in the criminal justice major are impacted by crime and victimization. So anytime a crime comes up, you have to be really careful in how you talk about it.
Well, thank you again for that insight and perspective, and definitely something that I will also continue to keep in mind as we continue to cover this, whether it's for months or, like you said, years. Whenever we see some sort of end to this in the process, we'll definitely keep that in mind. So thank you for that. Some sort of end to this in the process, we'll definitely keep that in mind. So thank you for that.
Of course.
My final question is just if there's anything else that you would like to share on this topic with your knowledge, anything else that I didn't get a chance to ask you that you would like to include.
So I've been asked many times about this research study and whether I viewed that to be a red flag. And I personally don't find it to be a red flag in and of itself, because so many students in criminology and criminal justice have very similar interests. What I will be very interested in learning in the coming weeks and months is whether there is any documented history of aggression towards women, stalking behaviors, those types of warning signs that potentially could be there. And at this point, he is still innocent until proven guilty. So we don't know. But that is what I will be looking at as somebody with a expertise in violence against women, is whether there are any of those warning signs that potentially were there. And, something that's important to point out is that, for example, and this is not to say that he has done this, but stalking is very hard to prosecute. So if somebody doesn't have a criminal record, that doesn't necessarily mean that hasn't happened in the past, right? So that'll be what I'm kind of looking for. Those are the red flags that I would be seeking out as somebody with a PhD in criminology and justice.
I found this to be a very interesting interview because I believe I learned something new in it. Hearing it from a professor with a PhD of crime and justice, a master's with criminology, and a PhD with crime and justice, it is interesting to hear that she doesn't find it a red flag of the research or the dissertation. The research study that Brian Kohlberger put up in Reddit. That is really interesting because most of law enforcement experts and lawyers, attorneys found that to be a red flag. So it's nice hearing it from the expertise of someone in criminology and crime and justice background, especially a professor. That is new. But what I find to be a bit interesting in that part is maybe it's different in crime and justice and in mental health. Because when I got my degrees in mental health, we were supposed to go through the university of what researches we put up when we were searching. I found that part to be very interesting because when we were doing our researches and dissertations in the university, whatever research we put up, we had to go through the university to get it confirmed that we were allowed to do that research. Because in mental health, I think it carries more sensitive subjects, and the research study that Brian Christopher Kohlberger put up in the mental health side, I do not think our professors would have granted him to put that up. Because those are serious questions like, how did you feel when you committed the crime? Did you pre-plan it? Did you prepare yourself before going to the crime? What was your emotional state like? Those are serious questions that I don't know if other psychologists and mental health and psychiatrists around, they could put it in my comment section. Over here, we had to be really careful of what we put up, and we couldn't do that without permission. And another thing is, in our universities, when we were doing research and dissertation, not only did it have to go to the universities and to the university boards, we had to literally choose between certain topics. And I doubt, you can imagine, with mental health, I doubt we would be allowed to do a research like that because we are dealing with vulnerable people with mental health illnesses. So the last thing we need is to trigger up people. But I can understand where the professor is coming from because mental health and crime have a lot of relations. There are kind of people with mental health illnesses, not everyone, but many, do commit crimes. So I can understand where she's coming from, but I think with mental health, it would have been totally different. Because I don't think anyone should be allowed to conduct a research like that. The other thing that I found a red flag with his research is it wasn't conducted by a university. He did it on Reddit. And that is a social media website, so I don't even understand what is the rules of Reddit and why they allowed a research like that to be put up. Just in case, I'm really interested in, did he get participants? Did he get people to do the research with him? He was asking for people to get involved in his research, and that I found to be concerning. But I find it very interesting that it is a normal part of criminology students and crime and justice students to be doing a research like that. That is actually interesting. But why did he do it on social media is actually a red flag, I believe. But if I could just give my opinion a bit about, everyone's interested in Bryan Kohberger is criminology and crime and justice degree and such things. I'm actually more interested, as a mental health counselor, I'm more interested in if he's had any childhood trauma, if he suffers of PTSD or anxiety or severe clinic depression. I'm more interested with his eye diagnosis. Was it snow vision? Such things is really interesting to find out. What was his mind of state when the times of these crimes that he's allegedly being accused of? I really wonder, what was his social network like? Was he socializing with people? Did he have friends? We know that we've heard that he was allegedly having problems and issues with his university where he was teaching the PhD course or something. So I really want to know. We've heard from one student of his who said that Bryan Kohberger graded them very strictly. And that is kind of interesting too, because was he grading them strictly so that he could get them in a good status? Some teachers want their students to do the best, to be excellent in their job. Or was he doing that because he was going through his own mental health struggles, or was he going through emotional struggles? I wonder what was the relationship between him, his parents, the relationship between him and his sisters. And this goes back to mental health. I'm really interested in the 5 years that he was allegedly doing heroin. What was the side effects? What outcome has that left him with? Those are important questions. I think this case of Bryan Christopher Kohberger has to do with two things. Definitely his crime and justice and criminology background, but definitely it has to do with his mental health state in case he committed these crimes. Mental health state is always important in every single case, I believe. In most of the cases when it comes to murder, because did the person have a temporary insanity? Was the person suffering of any mental health illnesses that brought psychosis or other side effects in the picture? That could have led into this. And like the professor said, stalking is very interesting too. Was he stalking these students? Was he actually dating one of the roommates? Or was he friends with the roommates? All those are interesting questions too, to find out later on in this case. But the question is, how much are we going to find out? Is important. Another thing I would really love to know, if Bryan Kohberger was under therapy, any kind of therapy. He has a sister who's a mental health counselor. So I wonder if she noticed any side effects. Maybe if the family are not telling us about any mental health illnesses that he suffers from. All these are important questions. Please leave your comments in a mindful way in the comment section. Y'all do that always. I really appreciate all my subscribers, old, new, all my subscribers. Y'all are all really decent, respectful, mindful, and we all have something in common. We all want justice for the 4 victims, and we want the correct justice to be served. Just like the professor said, he's not guilty until proven guilty, and that's what many people forget. Everyone seems to be trashing Brian Christopher Koberger, but people are actually forgetting that we need to see more evidence on him, more evidence pointing towards him. Please like, share, and subscribe.